the Belated Binge Podcast.
Hi, and thanks for watching Belated Binge on YouTube. Here we post mostly unedited footage from segments of our podcast series where we re-binge some of the most iconic series in recent memory that I was incredibly late on. Follow along as we're rereading the Harry Potter series and join the discussion in the comments section. If you enjoy it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss an episode. And of course, if you want to hear the episode in full, you can listen to Belated Binge wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media, become a patron for early access and exclusive bonus content. Again, thanks for watching Belated Binge.
Play-by-play.
So the play-by-play segment of the Belated Binge podcast is where we give, the play-by-play, the in-game announcements, the recap of the chapter that we're covering for this episode. And this one, Chapter 1 of Sorcerer's Stone, The Boy Who Lived, starts off with Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4, Privet Drive, were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. This is perhaps the most iconic opening line in literature, although coming from me honestly isn't saying much because I'm not the biggest reader. But it also, I heard somebody say this before, and I really liked it, so I'm going to share it here too. It reads very much like Harry's sarcastic sense of humor. As you know, most of the books in this series start right here at number 4 Privet Drive, but through the eyes of Harry, in the summer between school most of the time. But since we don't actually meet our protagonist until the end of this chapter, it makes sense that we start here at number 4 Privet Drive, and we get at least a little bit, a little call out, a little toss, throwback, although we haven't thrown back to anything yet. I guess that doesn't make much sense. But a call out, an homage to the sassiness that we can later expect from Harry, our main protagonist for the story, even though, we haven't met him yet. But we will, as a cute little baby. Instead, we start through the eyes of Vernon Dursley. We get introduced to his family. They're going to be a cornerstone of the series, and they're actually directly responsible for the safety of the entire Wizarding world, despite the fact that they hate everything about it. But think about it. If they don't take Harry in at the end of this chapter, the charm from the blood magic that Dumbledore puts on Harry, he mentioned this in book 5, the Petunia accepting Harry is what seals the charm for the blood magic to continue to protect Harry against Voldemort throughout his childhood as long as he can call home, where his mother's blood resides. If they don't take him in, that blood magic charm never takes. Perhaps Harry never gets the protection that he needs. Perhaps he doesn't even make it to defeat Voldemort in the end. What kind of story is that? I don't know. But we're a long ways from that truly being a possibility. In this story, we want to hope that our little baby protagonist is going to defeat the bad guy at the end of the story. At this point, we're just meeting a grumpy fat guy with a nosy, annoying wife and a spoiled kid. In fact, we only learn about the Wizarding world indirectly through Vernon being angry at all these oddballs he sees throughout the day. We get Easter eggs for Professor McGonagall as a cat looking at a sign and maybe a map. We get mentions of owls and shooting stars, but it all just seems like strange behavior, not magic. And Vernon isn't here for it. It's the only thing souring his otherwise, normal day. Until he overhears someone dressed in a cloak mention the Potters and their son Harry. At that point, he's rattled. But he pulls, a Taylor Swift and shakes it off or whatever. Is that dated? Am I old? I don't know. But what's truly ingenious about starting the series this way is that it cements the idea that we later learn is, the Wizarding world is happening all around the Muggles. Us. It could just be, behind that brick wall or just around that corner, or maybe we caught a glimpse of something odd in an alley that we passed a block ago. It's all around us, just outside of our reach. And this ends up being the perfect way for this audience that gravitates to these books, in the first place, to be introduced to the world. Many people use fantasy novels as an escape from something, a way to get out of their own world for any number of reasons and get lost in a new one, where anything is possible. There are people who still identify with this story as adults, who might say, the owl with their letter from Hogwarts just got lost all those years ago. Just as there are 10-year-olds right now hoping amongst hope that their one birthday wish is that they're going to get their ticket for platform 9 3/4. If we had just immediately jumped into, this world of unreal circumstance, this wondrous, magical place with unicorns and vampires and trolls and goblins and gold and magic wands and cloaks and broomsticks that fly and all of these things, leaving everything familiar completely behind, would it have had the same effect that it did? I'm not sure. The books would still be good, I'm sure, but this was truly and still kind of is, a global phenomenon. 2 decades later, we're, still have this wacky giant fandom that is just obsessed with the Harry Potter series. And I think that the sense of it all being, just beyond our grasp is, has a lot to do with that, It's also fodder behind one of the theories that I always kind of chuckled at. We're not going to do a big deep dive into this one, more on, what those theories look like here in a bit, but there's content out there for it if you want to look it up. It's the theory that Rita Skeeter was actually upset with how she was being treated in the wizarding world, and she wanted to expose them to the muggles. So she wrote a series of novels about the events of the war with the Death Eaters and a bad guy named Voldemort, a chosen one who saved the day named Harry Potter, and she sold it to the muggles under the name J.K. Rowling. And for the record, that's one of the few times that you're going to hear this author's names mentioned on this podcast. In light of her recent stance she's been taking and her insistence of trying to get her foot as far into her mouth as she possibly can get it, here at Belated Binge, we recognize the controversy that has caused, within the fandom. While this podcast isn't going to be, the deep dive into the subject, it's not going to be your news, recent news, current events, for, a truly dedicated Harry Potter podcast. It's also not a pro-rolling podcast. There are real human beings who have been truly hurt and offended by the things that the author of this series has said. Our nod to those individuals is to try to keep our focus on the story and the world that spawned one of the most inclusive and socially aware fandoms, perhaps more than any other in history. And whenever possible, we'll use the term the author, because this story became something much bigger and much more impactful than any tweet the creator could write years later. Beyond the idea that this world could very well be real and happening without our direct knowledge, and beyond learning that magic exists, we learn a ton in this opening chapter. We learn that the Dursleys suck, Voldemort is the bad guy, he's been driven away for trying to kill a baby, Dumbledore is the chess master, Harry was orphaned and survived, he's famous, he's safer at the Dursleys, and that there's a mysterious letter that explains all of this that ends up being kind of the crux of the entire series in, written form. One thing that doesn't seem to get a ton of attention, and it's just another example of, what an incredible piece of fiction this series really is where it begins. A lot of people are aware and have talked quite a bit about the Harry Potter series as a frame narrative, ring theory, circle theory, whatever you want to call it. As a collection, it metaphorically acts like a record or a CD, if you can remember what those are, where it flows in a circle revolving around a center point. Themes in book 1 reflect in book 7, book 2 reflects in 6, 3 with 5, and 4 is the center point that everything revolves around. This has been talked about extensively by many, but what I haven't heard a ton of people bring up is that we actually begin the frame narrative in this very chapter. Our story begins when the wizarding world believes that the war with Voldemort ended. They think it's over, but we're just getting started. It opens at the close, and we get most of that from the subject of our scouting report segment, where we're going to do a lot more deep diving into this chapter with Albus Dumbledore.
The Belated Binge Podcast.